Good day everyone. We are now on the computer age. Today we will be learning more about one of the well-known operating system in computer. Here's Arvin and Tej to give us a part of history.
Brief history of Fedora. The Fedora project was created in late 2003. When Red Hat Linux was discontinued, Red Hat Enterprise Linux was to be Red Hat's only officially supported Linux distribution. While Fedora was to be a community distribution, Red Hat Enterprise Linux branches its releases from version of Fedora. The name of Fedora derives from Fedora Linux, a volunteer project that provided extra software to the Red Hat Linux distribution. And from the characteristic Fedora used in Red Hat's Shadowman logo. Fedora Linux was eventually absorbed into the Fedora project. Fedora is a trademark of Red Hat, although this has previously been disputed by the creators of the Fedora Repository Management software. The issue has now been resolved.
The history of Fedora operating system. Fedora is an RPM-based, general-purpose operating system built on top of the Linux kernel, developed by the community-supported Fedora project and sponsored by Red Hat. Fedora mission statement is Fedora is about the rapid progress of free and open source software. Linus Torvalds, author of the Linux kernel, says he uses Fedora because it had fairly good support. For PowerPC, when he used that processor architecture, he became accustomed to operating system and continues to use it.
Fedora Interface. Review the Red Hat backed Fedora project has released the latest version of its Linux-based operating system, Fedora 15, into the wild. Despite the similarities of the two leading Linux-based PC operating systems, Fedora has long played second fiddle to Ubuntu in the minds of many Linux fans. Now, for the first time, there are actually major differences between the two distros. For the most users, the debate between the two can be distilled down to GNOME 3 versus Unity, but as always, Fedora remains quite a bit different under the surface as well, with the Unity shell making waves, and that always good ones. In the Ubuntu community, Fedora 15 offers something of a refuge for those frustrated with the Unity shell. Unfortunately, GNOME 3, Fedora's new default desktop, while in much better shape than Ubuntu's Unity, is still very different than any version of GNOME you've used before. There is no question that GNOME 3 will be something of a shock for those accustomed to working with the GNOME 2.x line. But once you spend some time with it, GNOME 3 really does feel like a vast improvement over GNOME 2. After all, GNOME 2 borrowed much of its UI design and basic interface concepts from Windows 95, and it's been a long time since Windows 95 was cutting edge. Perhaps GNOME 3's most distinguishing visual characteristic is that it doesn't look like a cheap knockoff Windows. Perhaps that being a bit harsh on GNOME 2.x, but certainly much of the appeal of Ubuntu, and no small part of its success, came from the customization that Canonical made to the otherwise dull look of GNOME 2x.
GNOME. Three features a very different desktop and working environment. Gone are the traditional menus, icon on your desktop, and other common metaphors inherited from Windows. GNOME 3 was designed around the shell, which takes most of the features once found in the three main GNOME menus and pulls them off screen and into a shell that you can up and dismiss as needed. The result is a cleaner interface, to be sure, but that's also very different from most OS designs. In Fedora 15, there is essentially no desktop as you now think of it. There are no main menus to speak of, and no icons to click. Instead, you invoke the shell through keyboard shortcut or mouse gestures. And all gesture return in the form of a single full-screen panel. From this panel, you can launch apps, search by using the search box, and open windows and browse through applications. When you are done doing what you need to do, the shell slide back out of the way, leaving just your open window and documents. I've been using Genome 3 via Fedora 15 since the Fedora beta was released, and yes, it did take some getting used to, some unlearning of old bits, and certainly you can debate with whether that's a good or bad thing. But after a week or so of day-to-day use, I found it awkward to go back to Genome 2 times.
Here are some features of Fedora. First, fast boot. Fedora developers' goal was to get users from turning on their PC to a Genome login screen in 20 seconds or less. They did it. While it's not as fast as a premier Linux distribution like Splashtop or Moblin 2.0. It's the fastest boot up of full Linux distribution. Second, ext4 file system by default. ext4 is the data's official Linux file system, and its biggest advantage is for servers. You see, with ext4, you can have file system of up to 1 exabyte or 1 EB and up to 16 TB or 16 terabyte. Third, better graphics. Fedora 11 uses Xserver 1.6 for graphics, and that means you'll see an overall better and more stable display. Where this really shows its better advantage is if you're using multiple displays. But even you're just running a laptop with a 12-inch display, you'll still notice that the graphics are a smidge faster. Synaptics touchpad improvements. The overall effect is to make touchpads more responsive, and I mean in a good way. If you're a laptop or touchpad user, this change alone is enough to consider using Fedora 11. Last, DNS security extensions. Linux as a standalone operating system is much more secure than most operating systems. Anything though that works with the internet is vulnerable to attacks on the internet infrastructure. Recently, though, attacks against the DNS or the domain name system, the internet's address system, have become more common. To help secure your connection to the internet, Fedora now includes DNS security extensions by default.
Here are some examples of security that feature in Fedora. Bootloader password. Access to the bootloader console is one of the easiest means to gain access to the inward of a system. By password protecting it, you make it that much difficult for an unauthorized user to gain access at that level. The disk encryption is the top physical security measure that you can use to protect your data, and very few distributions make it easy to figure that's Fedora. All that is needed to install Fedora 16 on an encrypted file system. Enable the encrypt system option, the disk partitioning option system steps of the installation process. The third one is the stateful package filtering firewall. In Fedora 16, the firewall is activated out of the box. In a graphical interface of managing, it is installed and configured. The firewall is operating in stateful mode, which means that all outgoing connections from the systems are allowed. While any incoming connections not related to an entry in the state table is denied. The state table holds information about known active connections passing through stateful firewall. The last, the application firewall. While a stateful package filtering firewall regulates traffic in and out of the system and host-based
application firewall determines what applications can and cannot do inside the system. In Fedora 16, that service is provided by Linux, one of three application-level firewall Linux. By default, Linux is enabled in enforcing mode. In previous edition of Fedora, it was not uncommon for Linux alert message to pop up within a few minutes of using an installation, and most in the instances that led to the disabling of Linux.
We now head on software repositories. Fedora comes installed with a wide range of software that includes LibreOffice, Firefox, Empathy, Evolution, and GIMP. Additional software that is not installed by default can be downloaded using the package manager. Before Fedora 7, there were two main repositories, Core and Extras. Fedora Core contained all the base packages that were required by the operating system, as well as other packages that were distributed along with installation CD, DVDs, and was maintained only by Red Hat developers. Fedora Extras, the secondary repository that was included from Fedora Core 3, was community maintained and not distributed along with the installation CD, DVDs. Since Fedora 7, the Core and Extras repositories have been merged, hence the distribution dropping Core from its name. That also allowed for community submissions of packages that were formerly allowed only by Red Hat developers. Also prior to Fedora 7 being released, there was a third repository called Fedora Legacy. This repository was community maintained and was mainly concerned with extending the life cycle of the older Fedora Core distributions and selected Red Hat Linux releases that were no longer officially maintained. Fedora Legacy was shut down in December 2006. Third-party repositories exist that distribute more packages that are not included in Fedora either because it does not meet Fedora's definition of free software or because the distribution of that software may violate US law.
Yeah, let me show you something. Girls, you ready? Let's go.